Good morning and welcome. He's one of the leading candidates for governor in Florida, Republican Adam Putnam, finishing his second term as Florida Agriculture Commissioner after serving in both the Florida House and the U.S. House of Representatives. Sir, we thank you for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
For those who may not be as familiar in our audience, talk about your background personally, professionally, and politically, and why you're running for governor.
Well, I'm a fifth-generation Floridian. I'm from a small town in the middle of the state called Bartow. It's one of those towns where you never give anybody a straight answer about where you're from. You have to start between Tampa and Orlando and south of Lakeland and hope they're following along. But anybody who's ever driven to Tampa, when they get off at Yeehall, they go through the outskirts of Bartow. But I'm a farmer. We grow citrus and cattle, and that's what my family's always done. I'm a small business owner. I had the opportunity to represent Central Florida in the Congress, in the U.S. House. I did that actually for 10 years, but I escaped with my soul and my sanity still intact and came back to be Commissioner of Agriculture because I believe that Florida states is where you can make the difference and make an impact for people. And so I'm running for governor for a number of reasons, but my number one priority is I believe that the pendulum has swung so far that we are forcing all of our students into one funnel that says if you don't go to university, even if you take out $70,000 in student loan debt, if you don't go to university, you're going to be a loser, you're going to be a failure in life. And I reject that. I want to put vocational and technical training back into our middle schools, back into our high schools, support our state colleges, and rebuild our middle class by doing that so that our students know what all their options are for good paying jobs.
Can you do that when many in the legislature in Florida have their focus on charter schools and public schools argue that money and resources to do just that are being taken away by a Republican-led legislature?
Look, I'm a product of our public school system in Florida. My 4 children are in the public schools here in Florida. I'm a big believer in our traditional public school system. Charters have their place. Choice has its place. There are times when our traditional schools are failing, even by the state's own admission. And while we must make every effort to bring them up to speed, every day that goes by, our kids are falling further behind. So I support those choices, but it's about making the commitment, allocating the resources to support all of our students, not just the ones who are university bound. And that means teaching them, letting them know that nursing's the #1 job vacancy in Florida. Welders make 6 figures. The guy that works on your outboard motor, I mean, I know we don't tell our wives what that really costs, but those guys are making a good living. And think about the linemen who restored our power after Irma. I guarantee you'll pass a boat on the Intercoastal this summer named Irma in honor of the overtime.
Do you have a specific plan with a specific price tag attached to it for doing what you want to do?
I don't have a specific price tag, but I do have a specific plan. And there are a number of these career academies that are essentially operating around the state as pilot projects. They need to be put on steroids. They need to become the norm, not the exception. And keep in mind, this is not your father's shop class. This is modern skills like robotics, cybersecurity, culinary arts, marine manufacturing, and it needs to be tailored to each school district. So what we would do in Polk County would be different than what you're doing in Palm Beach County.
Are we doing enough in the state of Florida to tie in tech, whether it's vocational tech or college level work? Are we doing enough to tie that into employers? Is there enough networking in this state between the jobs that we're trying to train for in VOTech or college and the kind of jobs employers across Florida say they need? Is there a disconnect there?
There is a big disconnect. And I actually worry that some of the things the legislature has done over the last several years have widened the disconnect between what the school districts do, what we used to call community colleges, now state colleges do, and our university system. So let's take nursing, #1 job vacancy in Florida. You ought to be able to graduate from high school with a CNA so that you can go straight into the labor force. And then work on your bachelor's at Palm Beach State, close to home, affordable, accessible, with flexible hours. The whole system right now is geared to the university-bound student. University-bound student can go dual enrollment, can get AP classes, can graduate with their AA and half of college paid for. We ought to apply those same options, the same application of technology, to all of our students, not just one segment.
part of the centerpiece of a plan you'll continue to flesh out, and we'll hear in the months to come. As we talk schools, we have to talk about a topic that has dominated the discussion surrounding our schools, of course, and that is Parkland. Students you've seen marching in Florida. They plan to march the state capitol. We just had what was called landmark legislation passed in Florida, the Gun and School Safety Act. Had you been governor, would you have supported that as it was written and passed?
Well, I have to give the governor and the legislature some credit here, an awful lot of credit, because they moved quickly. They moved in a responsive way to the needs and wishes of the parents of the victims and to the students. Look, as someone who has 4 children in high school and middle school, this hits close to home. And I would have worked with the legislature to pass a bill that I could sign, closing those mental health loopholes, strengthening the information sharing between law enforcement, children and families, and the educators. And, you know, of course, bump stocks are something that should be banned. They are a circumvention of the current law and hardening our schools. You did not support, though, and do not support, and would not have signed raising the age to buy a gun, buy a rifle from 18 to 21. Right? Why not? You know, I grew up with firearms. My father took me to the woods. I take my children to the woods. People grow up who shoot, hunt, collect. I believe that young people who have the opportunity to learn to respect firearms, learn their safe use, they're not the ones who are committing these horrific acts. I worry about the students who grow up in this fantasy of violent video games, who suffer from mental health issues. The monster who shot up Parkland High School should not have had a gun at 18, at 21, or at 41. And yet, the gun control advocates say, look, nobody's disputing much more needed to be done on mental health, much more in terms of the red flags that weren't seen, all the way from the FBI, perhaps down to local law enforcement as well, all of that being investigated. But they say that the NRA and its supporters always say all of that should be discussed, but not guns. You can't drink until you're 21 in Florida. Many argue that the picture you painted, which is Rockwellian about the dad and son or daughters going out hunting, has nothing to do with the AR-15s and the high-powered rifles that so often are being used to turn schools into killing grounds. So, again, the question, 18 to 21, does that seem unreasonable when it might keep somebody from getting a high-powered rifle like an AR-15 that's not used for hunting with dad or mom to go into a school and kill people? The problem is that it prevents them from getting the simple shotgun that they could have bought at Walmart to go to a dove shoot or to go to the range. It prevents them from having access to all of the category of long guns. So they wiped them all out. For 3 years, from 18 to 21, you could go with dad or mom to shoot long guns until then. You know, you're old enough to go fight. You're old enough to go fight and die in Afghanistan and Iraq. You're old enough to be drafted, should there be a draft. It is adulthood. Why? Are we basically saying that we're going to push all of our constitutional rights that come with being an adult back to 21? But even the late Justice Scalia, who wrote the landmark majority opinion in the Heller ruling some years ago, asserting an individual right to bear arms, also said in part of that ruling, it doesn't mean an unlimited right to unlimited arms all the time. And people who oppose the NRA point of view, and you're a big supporter of the NRA, say, listen, we're not looking to take away shotguns or take away the privilege to go hunting or to protect your home. We're saying there's a certain class of weapons, assault weapons, that do not belong in society. And why will not the NRA or its supporters like you at least see that and be able to budge on that one particular piece of this debate? I think Justice Scalia had it right. There are weapons that are banned under the law. Bump stocks are an example of a circumvention of the ban on automatic weapons. And ATF should eliminate those. But we also know, and this is the important piece, we also know that we have to separate law-abiding citizens who are exercising their Second Amendment rights in a safe, lawful, responsible way from the mentally ill monster who attacked Parkland High School. And what I see in the passion surrounding this issue is that frequently lump everyone into one category, and I think that's inaccurate and unfair. To your point, though, you said a few moments ago about people go off and fight. They go to Afghanistan places. One of our local congressmen went off to fight in Afghanistan, nearly lost his life. Republican Brian Mast lost both his legs, combat veteran. He came out forcefully some weeks ago, a Republican congressman who knows the horrors of war up close, who knows the horror of killing weapons, and said, having seen that up close,
We do not need assault weapons on our streets. If you're talking to Brian Mast right now, how do you counter that argument from somebody who's seen the carnage up close and is making that statement?
Well, he has earned the right to express his views and has paid an enormous price. I have tremendous respect for him and for his opinions on that and many other issues. He has called for, I believe, hitting the pause button on sales of ARs. And the thing to keep in mind, I think people generally don't recognize that there are between 10 and 14 million ARs in circulation in the United States now. They have been a very popular firearm, whether you like them or not, and so banning them now is going to have the effect of driving up the price of those that are still in existence. And the bad guys, look, all of these new gun control laws, just ask the people of Chicago and Washington and other high homicide rate cities, gun control in and of itself is not going to bring down crime. The bad guys always find a way to get their hands on firearms. The monster who shot up Parkland, he waited longer than the state waiting period. He waited 5 days, not 3. And he purchased that firearm over a year ago. It was not a rash purchase just prior to the shooting. So all of these things need to be weighed in their totality, because at the end of the day, we all want our kids to be safe. We want teachers and students to be safe and have a safe learning environment. That's what I want for my children who are students in public high schools and middle schools, and that's what every child deserves. That means that when law enforcement comes to a kid's house almost 3 dozen times, and they don't know that DCF has also been there because the child posted a video of him cutting himself, who may not know that the school expelled him for a weapons violation, and the FBI ignores 2 direct warnings to their tip line, man, this is a catastrophic failure across the system.
This is going to be such a prime topic in the gubernatorial race, which is why we're spending considerable time on it. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about your day job as Ag Commissioner and some of the pros and cons and criticisms. But to wrap up on this side of the segment, what do you say to the young people who are 18 or about to be from the Parklands and other schools across Florida who you saw marching the other day, who will hear all this and say, from their perspective, not good enough?
Well, I think that we've heard not only the families say, in fact, I listened and I met with the students from Parkland when they came to Tallahassee, and I heard from the fathers who said, this is not a perfect bill. There are parts of this bill that we think should have gone further. There are parts of this bill that we don't agree with, but we applaud the fact that Florida is doing something to move this solution forward to keep our kids safe in school.
Before we go to break, there's been some criticism of a term you used once that's been pulled, but you said, quote, once a, quote, proud NRA sellout. What did that mean? The term's been pulled. What do you say to that?
It was a response to a column that had been written over 9 months ago, I guess it was. It was last spring. About the fact that I do support the Second Amendment. And the point that I am making is what I made earlier with you, which is that you have to separate law-abiding citizens, concealed weapons license holders, for example, where Florida has more than any other state, and our crime rate's at a 46-year low. It's not the law-abiding citizens who provide their background checks, provide their fingerprints, go to the extra classes, who get CWLs. It's not the law-abiding citizens who buy a hunting license. Right. They're law-abiding citizens who lawfully exercise their Second Amendment rights are not the ones who are responsible for these violent crimes.
If somebody wants to be governor for all the people, do you concede that proud NRA sellout was a bit too much?
Well, I certainly think it's important to be very sensitive to families who have lost the most precious thing that God gives us, which is their child. And we have an obligation as governor, as citizens, to make our schools safe.
If you're elected, will you try to repeal the piece of legislation, which the NRA is already suing over, about raising the limit from 18 to 21?
Well, I think that's way too premature to be discussing something like that. I think it's important that we continue to move forward, making our schools safer.
Well, you don't support raising the limit 18 to 21. The NRA is suing. If you were governor, would you move to repeal that piece of the legislation?
When I'm governor, I will enforce the laws that are on the books.
Okay.
That's what we should expect of any public official.
Plenty of other topics beyond guns to talk about, though. That will certainly, as you well know, be a prime discussion, but plenty of other things to talk about in the fall, and we're going to have you talk about those on the other side of the break, Commissioner.
Thank you
for being with us. Back in just a moment.